Well, welcome everybody. First, let me say the previous panel is a very hard act to follow, but we have some very serious discussions about transportation. And as we all know, after a summer of deadly heat waves, fires, floods, and severe hurricanes, it is quite evident that we are now in a climate crisis. According to the Rocky Mountain Institute, we only have 9 years to have greenhouse gas emissions to stay on track and hold the global temperature increase to 1.5 degrees. So for me, and I think for many of us here, the biggest question in sustainable travel is how do we decarbonize the transportation aspect of travel? And we have a great panel here. First, let me introduce Ian Moore, who is the CCO at VistaJet, Lucas Bobes, who is Group Environmental Officer and ESG Reporting at Amadeus, Michel Taride is a board member and the former president of Group Hertz, and Marc Ivaldi, who's professor at the Toulouse School of Economics and the research director of the Institute for Sustainable Aviation. Thank you, gentlemen. I'm very excited to have this conversation. Ian, let's start with you first. Can you tell us a bit about what VistaJet is doing now, and how are you planning for the future of sustainable aviation?
Thank you, Jane, and thank you for having me on. So first and foremost, I think the industry as a whole, if I look at aviation, has rather a disjointed, at this point in time, current goal. We're sort of a group of, say, civil aviation industry bodies, IATA, and the general business aviation community have set a goal of 50% reduction of emissions by 2050. And I think, referring to your point earlier about how quickly and what sort of time is left to make reductions, we really at VistaJet, we feel that's really behind the time. So we've set ourselves a goal of 2025 for carbon. Many elements to that. First of all, I think most of the commercial airlines, including private jets as well, have mainly focused on carbon offsets. But we feel that there's multiple angles that we can focus on through our own work that we do in our offices, for example, all the way through to how we get our customers to utilize our aircraft. So our goal is to really start shocking the industry into really moving far quicker than what the standards are already set. And a couple of things we're working on, for example, the carbon offset program. We have 80% of our members already that have signed up to our carbon offset program. Our SAF, sustainable aviation fuel, which is far better because it emits 85% less carbon emission than Jet A fuel, for example. So on the offset program, it's obviously once it's in the air, but if you can put 85% less of it into the air in the first place, that's obviously far better and far more focused. And other areas we looked at, we have the most technologically advanced aircraft. We're looking at fuel consumption reduction technology, so matching the right flight paths for our aircraft, the timings, making sure airports are open, they can receive our aircraft at the right time. That means the reduction in waste of just waiting in the air. We have a fuel efficient booking system to find out the right amount of fuel that we need for per flight. So we're really fixated on multiple angles that we can do, all the way down to what we actually have inside our cabin. We're moving away to, we have 90% of reduction of our single-use items inside the cabin for our customers as well. So all of these elements working together to ensure that we're getting to that carbon neutrality by 2025. And there's no other company that have that lofty goal. But our main aim is to really get the industry to move far quicker and to start having best practice inside the industry. So we would love it if other companies are coming up with even better plans than we have so we can copy them, because frankly, it's a dual problem.
Well, great. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No problem.
No, I thank you for your leadership, first of all, because we do need leadership in this space. And having a 2025 goal instead of a 2050 goal is very important. You may have seen Peter Comlis at The Guardian last week said that net zero, that phrase, net zero by 2050, which many corporations in all industries are using that as a target, has said that that's deadly procrastination. And I think that is true, and that's so really glad to hear that VistaJet is taking a leadership role in this space. Lucas, let's turn to you and talk about the role of technology. How is Amadeus helping travelers and operators be more sustainable?
Okay, well, first of all, thank you for having me here. It's a pleasure to discuss with you. Well, regarding operators, actually, I was glad to see that some of the solutions that you have described very quickly are part of what we deliver, not for them directly, but for the airlines. For example, just to give an example that I think everybody has experienced, or at least many travelers we have experienced as passengers, the situation in which we are boarded in an aircraft, especially in large airports, waiting in the runway to take off, basically because there's a queue of aircraft that are with engines on, of course, burning fuel, having these extra economic costs, having extra releases of unnecessary CO2 emissions and local pollution, noise, misuse of the infrastructure. And this can be relatively easy solved with technology solutions. We have a product called Sequence Manager that addresses precisely this issue by sharing information about the different actors in the airport. And we've implemented this, for example, in Munich and Copenhagen airport to reduce the amount of time that aircraft spend on the runway before takeoff. So this is, I would like to highlight above all the opportunities that we have to improve yet significantly the synergies between economic and environmental objectives. So we're working on that on the operator side, as you said, and we invest heavily on IT solutions because the success of our company depends very much on how much are we able to help our customers to become more efficient. We invest about 900 million euros a year in R&D, and that's a critical aspect of our company. For the travelers, we, as you know, we are not a B2C directly, but we have a global reach through our travel agency customers. And that gives us, I think, a very interesting opportunity to reach, to pass information, to communicate with travelers, not directly, as I said, but through the products and solutions that our customers use. This information has been traditionally passed on to travelers to select their trips, for example, information about schedules, availability of fares. And we realize that we need to factor in sustainability as part of those pieces of information that travelers use to make a choice. At the moment, we are delivering information from for CO2 emissions per passenger. This is quite a difficult issue because there is not a single standard that addresses this issue. So we are working on that to improve that with other partners as well.
Great, thank you. And that data is becoming more and more important, not only for the traveler, for the customer, but as we've seen in the past 5 years, investors are demanding quality ESG data, and companies like yours can help provide that and help companies be more transparent, but also have credible data as they're disclosing their performance and measuring it.
If I may, actually, well, when we decided what should be our strategy, we decided we first do the sort of materiality analysis of our impact, and we say, okay, the impact of our operations is relatively small. It needs to be addressed, and we need to walk the talk. But it is much more that we can do to help the industry. So we should focus on that as a conclusion of the reasoning that you just explained.
Great, thank you. Michel, moving on to your experience at Hertz, but also your expertise in smart cities. What is the role of electric vehicles now, and the role of smart cities as we become more sustainable in travel?
Good, thank you first. I hope you can hear me and see me okay. If not, please let me know. But like everyone, I'm delighted to be here, and I hope next year in person, of course. Mm-hmm. So now we're touching on ground transportation, electric vehicles, and smart cities. Needless to say, this is a big issue, very acute, where a lot is actually going on, but it is very slow. And it is very slow for two main reasons at a high level. One, it is complex, and it involves many, many different stakeholders, public, private, tech, operators, investors, and so forth. Regulation plays a role as well. So that's complex and make it slow. EV certainly, while not perfect, is not completely clean to produce electric vehicles, and there are a lot of issues attached to it. I won't go in detail now, but think about building batteries in a way that is environmentally friendly. How do you recycle those batteries which are extensively used and so on? So you have a lot of issues. However, I do want to start positive and say there are a lot of encouraging trends, and I see three. One, there is obviously a general awareness in the public. I think the young generation now is keen to use versus as own vehicles. The technology, we have a revolution in front of us. When you think AI, Internet of Things, this whole world of sensors that will help maybe autonomous vehicles in the future, and also a lot of investment. At the end of the day, car manufacturers have invested billions of dollars or euro in building electric vehicles, even autonomous vehicles, which should make the whole thing quite effective. I think, transport operators are trying. I was at Hertz, as you mentioned, working very hard to transform the model, make everything digital, plan demand to make sure you have the vehicles where the customer is at any point in time. And this is not simple. I guess the challenge is, in a city in particular, we have what we now call an ecosystem, where all these pieces are interdependent on one another. And to get everybody to work together, it's not simple, quite frankly. And that's where, maybe we'll talk about that later, that takes leadership. The question is who should take leadership and how, with all the other issues which we may touch on around data and regulation and, and taxes and everything. But in the end, maybe I can leave you, finish this question with a couple of acronyms which just help remember where we are going. So in the automotive world, we talk about CASE, which is vehicles become more and more connected, which help connectivity between players, autonomous, shared usage, and electric. And that's the trend that industry is going, which I think will make the world certainly greener, safer, cleaner, and more effective. And then it's about, connected all the mode of transportation, getting into, it's a little technical, I'm sorry, but like multimodal, integrated transport system within the cities. So a lot to talk about, but and a lot already happening, but slow given the number of players involved.
Great. And Mark, from an academic point of view, is sustainable transportation doing enough now to meet the needs of today's travelers, to reach the Paris targets, and also be resilient to a warming world?
So you asked me to be the bad boy. Huh?
Yes.
Okay, I will play it. So, well, the question is asking. Our question is asking what are the sustainable transportation, and at this point, right now, except train in electric routes or walking, there are not too much sustainable transportation. And as you know, transportation is 21% of the total emission of CO2 emission, and among them, 75% is from cars, and but 12% from aviation. Okay, so the main problem is cars, and so cars and trucks is 15%. Okay, and aviation is 2-3%. Okay, so with this number, I cannot say that we are doing much. I'm going to take one more numbers for France, but it applies also to other country. On the period 1990 to 2019, the emission from transport has increased by 9% in France. In the same time, all the other sectors together have decreased CO2 emission by 28%. Okay, so really, to answer your question, it was easy. I have this number, and the problem, the challenge, is going to be even worse in the future. remember that it's only 11% of the world population taking the plane. And with the growth of population and with the return to growth that we are going to see in the next month or years, there is a trend of an increase of CO2 emission if we don't do. So clearly we need to do important effect. There are indeed, as Michel has said, there are some good news. Clearly, electric cars are starting to get there, to get in the picture. A recent car manufacturer is now producing or selling a car, same model of car, electric or with fuel, with the same price. Okay, so that makes electric car very affordable now. The second important challenge for transportation is that it is very unequal. So between rich and poor countries, between rich and poor people within the country, there is a lot of difference. As you know, there is only 1% of the world population that is producing half of the CO2 emission of aviation. Okay, so that, of course, raises the problem of how we will organize the choice of policies that we can do to reduce CO2 emissions.
Great, thank you. And speaking of challenges, there is great innovation out there, but I think my concern and many concern of government officials and business people and travelers is we're not doing it quick enough. So what are some of the challenges that we're seeing in terms of becoming more sustainable today and not wait till 2050? Lucas, do you have any thoughts on that?
Okay. Yeah, well, I would like to start by making reference to some of the figures that you pointed out. But I think a lot of the debate about these issues are becoming a little bit too emotional and sometimes not too much to the facts. And I think you mentioned a few figures that are quite illustrative of what the future will look like or what is it that we need to address. For example, you mentioned, I didn't have that figure, but our estimations, I think, are around the same. 11% of population are the only ones that take planes. So that means that 89% of the population, which is 6 billion something people, have never boarded an aircraft. And we have to ask ourselves, do they want to board an aircraft? If they didn't, was it because of sustainability considerations or because they couldn't afford? I would leave the question open. I think the answer is quite obvious. Therefore, we need to get ready for a world in which we can have 7 billion people maybe in the air, and for that, we need to be creative. And I think history of humanity has proven to be smart to address significantly challenge. I mean, we are in a room honored to an explorer that discovered Brazil and he didn't even know where he was going. So I think that at least tells us something. But okay, I deviated a little bit because I was quite, I think your numbers
I do think that's a good point. The aviation industry always likes to say 2 or 3% of total global emissions. Yeah. But that's still billions of pounds of carbon. Even though it seems like a small number when we're talking growing. Percentages, but in reality, it still is quite a bit of carbon.
So that's why what I wanted to say also is that we need to, be frugal about travel, but at the same time trust in the capacity that we have to develop solutions that addresses the issue, because it will not go away. And for example, I would like to bring also some of the issues that have been raised about the situations in which that today are not efficient. I mentioned the ones that I described at the airports. I think there has been also mentioning of the possibility of implementing better solutions for multimodality. This is something that technology already can do. And as it was pointed out, we need to bring players in place. It is a difficult challenge to combine platforms together of different travel providers, but it can be done. We actually participated in a project a few years ago called Always Traveling with the European Union, in which we put together ground transportation providers, railway providers, and airlines, so that travelers could, in one single ticket, make a booking, pay for it, be informed about potential disruptions, change the ticket, and get boarded on all the means of transportation. This can be done. It's difficult. It requires cooperation. And I would like to highlight here, and it's one of the main reasons why I think this is very good conference, the importance of public-private cooperation looking forward. In my opinion, we need, for this kind of projects, for example, on multimodality, we need the leadership, or at least the coordination from public institutions.
Great. You mentioned multimodal. I know that's, Michel, that's an area that you're quite familiar with. Do you have anything to add? And what the future is? Does it need to be multimodal?
In the cities and even in the regions, because we always talk about the big cities where the problem is obvious, but it's actually a whole country. You have deserts in every country almost. So yes, I really believe that multimodality is the key. Why? It's because, you know, you want people, I'm going to give one number too. In a city, a vehicle is idle, meaning stopped 94% of the time, which is crazy, frankly. This is why we want use versus ownership. Why multimodality? Because at any point in time, people and companies, goods also needs to move, not just people, we need to move goods. We now talk about last mile delivery. We are starting to see drones. We have micromobility. So new transport solutions are coming. If you think of a world where everything is connected and you have, for any need, when you want to go from A to B to C, whether you're a person or a good, say a parcel, you have the right transport solution there at your doorstep, at the right time, at the right price, with the right level of emission. Then you think of a world where everything is fluid. And that's the only way really to eliminate congestion, reduce pollution. But then it goes beyond the transport itself. You got to connect traffic management, you got to connect parking, insurance. The consumer, if it's a consumer or a company, need to be able, like, like Luca was just saying, the technology enables that. You got to be able to pay one time, and then all the data needs to be shared. So yes, an ideal world to me is a world where everything gets connected, the data is shared, and the right transport solution is there on time. But to make this happen, my God, it's not simple. The question is how to get there. I think the goal, everybody agrees that multimodal, smart, meaning digital, integrated is the way to go. But the question is how do we get there step by step? And which leadership, which takes the lead? Who takes the lead?
And Ian, if I could turn to you and back to aviation, and perhaps put you on the spot a bit, why do you think your competitors or the large airlines have not taken the step that VistaJet has to make these commitments and to look at a shorter time frame? VistaJet is taking this more immediate and putting this front and center. I know last week United just committed to buying, I think it was 1 billion gallons of sustainable aviation fuel. So which is great, but that fuel doesn't exist yet.
Yep. Well, it doesn't exist in its most efficient form and being exactly where the aircraft are. That's probably the biggest challenge. I think the industry as a whole is moving as quick as a large, fragmented industry can move. I think to a certain degree, like you have obviously a lot of airlines are national airlines and owned by governments as well. So it's kind of getting back to Michel's point earlier about how difficult it is to have both private and the public enterprises working together as one. I think the biggest challenge on the aviation side, and I think we all can see this, is the capital costs of setting up aircraft, for example. It probably has a 30 to 40 year horizon to make money and to make the points. And so to have the technology and to have the efficiencies in the engines and so forth, you have to have been thinking about this 20, 30 years ago to be able to see it come to fruition now. And so the challenge we have as an industry, be it an operator like ourselves or a consumer, is trying to find the most efficient way that you look in short, medium, or longer term strategies. And, you know, you're looking at some really exciting technology coming in for electronic aircraft, but they are still, you know, probably 3 to 5 years away, and they're very short range. So that sort of fits into the ecosystem in one way or the other. The industry is moving, and I think the consumer at the end is becoming more and more fixated on exactly what their emissions are doing. I think you mentioned very clearly, Jane, earlier about investors. Our end clients are very focused on what we are doing because their investors are wondering what they're doing as well. So the awareness is definitely out there. I think there's a lot of grappling around to see what we can do best. And, you know, we're proud of what our commitment is. And I don't think that 2050 50% carbon emission target is going to hold very long. I think that's going to be something that's going to be changing very, very quickly because the pressure is coming from all sides, which is a good thing, creating competition and creating that efficiency. But the biggest stumbling block to commercial aviation is frankly, the huge capital and R&D costs of the aircraft that just needs to be part of the discussion. The easiest thing in the world to do is to say no one flies. But we all know the massive benefits of what a global, closer citizen has created for us in terms of in terms of world development. So we need to find that happy medium, and we know we have, as you mentioned, you know, less than a decade to really get this thing done. So I think we're all moving at the right speed. It's just, can we get it integrated? And that's the biggest challenge for global leadership all around the world on multiple different topics, not just sustainability.
And Mark, turning back to you, and you had mentioned other modes of transportation. What can we learn about other sectors of the transportation industry, like logistics, UPS, FedEx, that are already doing multimodal? They use aviation, they use rail, obviously, their trucks. What can we learn from what's happening in that part of the transportation sector?
Well, I think that Michel has already replied. I mean, from this industry, what these big firms are doing is precisely they are integrating. They are doing multimodality. Okay, so I think that the answer is, Michel was a very good advocate of this solution, and but I want to challenge his view, not because I'm against, but just to bring other ideas. I think that car, and you see that we said before that electric car is starting to be a success, and it's clear that in 3 or 4 years, the number of cars, electric cars in Europe is going, and in the US is going to be very important. And why is that? Because it is the most flexible transport solution. It is in front of my house, and I can go to the parking next to my office, and so and that is a constant. I mean, it's a law, I will say. And people will look always for a very flexible transport system. And I believe, so I'm not going too much in the future, but I think that a flexible solution on light aviation, like drones and electric drone and things like that, are going to have an important role in the future because they allow to be very flexible. So in terms of taxing in cities, transporting commodities and things like that, I think that these solutions are going to be to have a big role in the future.
And if I could also ask, what's the role of regulation
So I'm coming back to be a bad boy. All right. Okay, so I'm playing the role of the economist. I disagree. I mean, transportation is not making enough effort, as I said. And why is that? There are two reasons. The first reason is that they don't get the right price signal. For the time being, fuel is much cheaper than any other type of energy. Until fuel is cheap, we are not going to see innovation that will be disruptive in the system. So it is very important to do that.
But isn't that because fossil fuels are heavily subsidized and renewables are not?
No, because it's it is difficult to implement some solution because that need different policy. There are different policy. For example, you can do offsetting. I don't think it means that there are people are willing to do something for climate change. Okay, but I don't think it is enough. We are seeing that. The second possibility is to make constraint for big cars in center city. Politicians they like that, but it's not really, as we know, it's not really efficient. There are a market for pollution rights. It's going, that start to be efficient, but for the moment, transport is not in the market of pollution right in Europe, for example. So they are not going to get the right price if they are not there. And then there are taxes, and of course, nobody wants to hear about that. I did not hear about taxes. You don't want to hear about taxes. But you have to know what it is, taxes. Taxes is to create the conditions to change the price. And remember what I said before, that there is only 1% of the people that are polluting in aviation. So I think, maybe, and given the inequality of things, that we also can think about that. So what we call a Pigouvian tax is a tax that needs to be based on the real cost of the climate change, and the money that we get from that is to be redistributed to help people to buy the good infrastructure, housing, cars, that will help decreasing the CO2 emission. And I think that these solutions are progressing, but maybe we'll discuss that a little bit later.
So I'm going to turn back to Michel and Ian. From the private sector point of view, taxes and regulation are usually things that CEOs do not like. What are your thoughts on what Marc just shared with us and his thoughts on a carbon tax?
You want to start, Jan? Or?
I'll go quickly, Michel, and then you can follow through. I think we can take it's a fair point. The one thing I think we're seeing, which is coming from the private sector, is really the large investment firms that are really pushing hard on ESG in total, in general. And I think that's probably the best way. I can only look at it from my clients and the speed at which they want to have certificates. They want to be clear as to what their offsetting is doing, what their SAF fuel is helping to do. That's coming not from a regulatory perspective or coming from a taxation perspective, and that is one way of getting there, but it's actually coming from their shareholders, big stakeholders, and frankly their customers as well. So I think you're getting there now. To the point of whether it's quick enough, that's another thing. But regulation, taxation, and I think demand side regulation as well, I think all come and contribute. It's just a matter of speed, really. That's really the issue here. Is it happening quick enough? And you started earlier mentioning we had 9 years, and that just tells you that things need to we really need to be moving at a rapid speed, and maybe it's not just one approach. But Michel, I'll hand over to you. Maybe you might have a bit more broader angle.
Well, I agree that tax is a major trigger to say good or bad behavior. So taxing and incentivizing, you have the negative tax, but you also have the subsidies. And I guess it's a big piece of the equation, and it drives behavior at individual and company levels. Nobody can, I think, challenge that. My point, though, is what do we do with those taxes? And I think there are 4 things. One is tax. Second is infrastructure. I'll come back to that and try to be brief. Third is standards and some regulation around certain things. And that's where the public, I believe that the private sector is actually moving quite fast. I mean, investment is there. ESG is becoming something. I think, and I know there are, public servants, ministers in the room, so I may be a little provocative here. I believe that the private sector moves actually quite fast. If regulation was even ahead of the curve, let alone ahead, but at least there, in real time with what's going on, at the pace at which the technology, for example, is moving, and if we would have leadership bringing all of us together, we would probably be in a different place. I don't mean to be critical, but we got to move faster. So if you take EV, electric vehicle is a good example. Years ago, there was no standards. You had 3 types of plugs. Now we have a standard. Now you have fast charging. But then if you don't have a charging infrastructure, while vehicles still have a relatively low range, even though things are improving, well, it doesn't give the confidence to the consumer to buy an electric vehicle. That's the issue of infrastructure and standard already. So it's not like the investment has not been made. Car manufacturers have spent billions at loss to do this, and regulation is pushing for that. But if the infrastructure is not there, it will not happen, and that's the complexity. So yes, regulation is important. Tax is can drive behavior, but the rest needs to follow in a way. Another example of the regulation, we're talking about aviation, and I'm involved myself in certain projects like Hyperloop, vertical takeoff, landing, eVTOL planes. All these will need to be certified. It's not simple because safety is paramount. Drones, whether in the air or on the ground, are there. So that's where regulation will need to move as fast as possible. It's not simple. So yes, the issue of tax regulation, but beyond that, I'd say coordination, integration, and leadership is paramount in my mind.
Great. We only have a few more minutes left, so I'm going to ask each one of you, in the spirit of Evora, to make a commitment that a near-term actionable resolution that where each of you can lead. Luca, I'll start with you.
Okay, thank you. Well, following on from what some of the topics that I mentioned, we are working on a project to inform travelers clearer about the impact of their trip and helping them, empowering them to make more sustainable choices. So to agree on hopefully on a common standard to use in the industry to make reference to when it comes to impact, which I think is critical. And we are working with other partners in the industry in this direction because we believe that this is a non-competitive issue and we have to work in cooperation with other stakeholders. And hopefully by next year, this time, we will progress.
Great. Marc, how about you?
So 3 points. First thing, I said, I forgot to say, one important problem also is data, as you, and the problem of exchange of data or sharing data, okay? Mm-hmm. And that raises a big problem in terms of what will be the right industrial structure. Of course, firms don't want to share data. It's very easy, very difficult for researchers to have data on aviation, for example. because it's not transparent, and there is no way to get data. So no way to think that we will be able to do multimodality if we don't share data. So, but then one solution is to accept integrated firm. But integrated firm, they are big firms, and they may have too much market power. So in any case, I would need a regulation. The second point is that I fully agree with Michel. There are many reasons to be optimistic. The awareness of young people is tremendous. I mean, we have seen that this morning, and I think that it's a good news. The very large investment in the US and in Europe on new technology. What else? The fact, for example, thanks to the market of pollution right, now solar and wind energy are almost competitive without subsidy. So that's free, at least good news. In terms of commitment, what I learned from this conference, this forum, is that we, in fact, we should think global. Because we think global, because we think that what we are doing is important for the other. We can take local action. So I will say, contrary to, but just to be in controversy with Christian, with my friend. So think global to act local. And I think that, and to act local, my decision will be to double the number of kilometers I will do with my electric bike during this year.
All right, great. Thank you. Michel.
I mean, I cannot speak on behalf of a company anymore because but I can give some views. I think just to challenge a little bit what Mark was just saying, I think it's a combination of top-down with strong leadership, probably at city, country, continent level, and then, of course, bottoms up, where everyone wants to contribute. And then there is like, we got to glue this. So, I think one thing that could be quite easy, globally probably, is to actually have transparency. Every time I go from A to B, I, as a consumer, should know my impact on the environment. That should be a decision that public sector could take quite easily. It's measurable. We know how to measure it. It should be like a law to publish it. So if I move somewhere, I know how much I consume. That's just like one pragmatic first step to continue building awareness from all angles. Second, I really think this issue around public, private, and intercompany partnership is essential. But yes, there needs to be some regulation and standards around that, including sharing data. The technology, Lucas is absolutely right, does exist. But the question is, how do we use it? Those would be the two things. If we have people being extremely aware, and then we have this partnership and collaboration, because nobody can do it on its own, but yet if everybody does something, maybe we'll get there. Sorry, it's not that tangible, I guess, but those are three kind of summary points.
Great,
I
thank
thought I would
you.
articulate.
Wonderful. And Ian, I will give you the last word.
Sure. Actually, Michel sort of grabbed a few of my points. I think the first thing I think our company would like to be, and our main aim here is to be as transparent and as accountable as possible. I think potentially my subsect of an industry, it's private aviation, inside commercial aviation, inside travel, hasn't been maybe as visible from a transparency perspective. Many reasons for that, but I think we want to challenge the industry to be that. And I think actually Michel's point of having that visibility of your own footprint in the world and having that be incentivized from a positive rather than a shaming and the negative may be a great way of actually presenting that to people, saying that, you know, this is the how much emissions you were able to save rather than what you spent. Could be a way to do it as well. But I think from our perspective and our company's perspective, we want to be the protagonist in the industry. We will continue to challenge the industry and what it does. We'll continue to challenge ourselves. I get that from my kids, as well as getting it from my staff, as well as getting it from my customers. And that's why I have great confidence, or I'm optimistic, let's put it that way, of what the future holds, because of just how much this is, you know, first and foremost in people's minds today. So our commitment is to be transparent. Our commitment is to be also open to what other industries, what other people, what other companies within our own industry, and what technology can do to help us get to where we need to get to. Because, you know, we obviously connect people around the world. That's what, you know, and transportation, and that's what tourism does. And it helps so many other byproducts, whether it's commercial, whether it's cultural understandings. There's so many benefits to it. We've just got to do it in a way that, you know, we have a sustainable planet. And I think that's a really noble and lofty goal, and we have to get there, and we'll do it all together as long as we're open and transparent.
Great. Just to sum up what I'm hearing, 3 points come to mind, and a bit of alliteration, I was writing it down. What we need, not only in the transportation, travel transportation, but I think the entire industry, is integration, investment, and infrastructure. So I want to thank all of you for your...
Can I add a quick one?
Of course.
2 seconds, promise?
Yes.
I would think something that companies do very well, best practice sharing. There are a lot of great initiatives around the world. How much do we hear about those, and how much do we try to share those best practices? When you think that Norway is already 50% electric vehicles, we talked in the French press, there was, you know, report around Denmark and how the bicycle is a safe way. So in other words, there are best practice sharing that is, or good practice that should be shared and promoted. That's all.
Thank you, Michel. That is a great note to end on. Thank you all.